That's where it comes from. The other part is my biology, which is very important. It's important for me to know. But it's not really, particularly my children. It's not really them. My kids are me. And I'm Gary Klar. I'm glad they are. It's a very complicated question.
As you're about to see, that is one colossal understatement, because that caseworker from Connecticut wasn't finished with Gary just yet.
Just when you thought it couldn't get any weirder.
Just when I thought it couldn't get any weirder.
Ties continues.
Brother Richard, I'll get it out of you, don't worry. One.
At age 51, Gary Klar had learned for the first time that he'd been adopted. That was unsettling enough. But when he heard the name of the sister whose medical search had unlocked his secret past, he was floored.
Well, the first thing I said to the caseworker was, do you realize that there is an issue here?
Micah Ellison is the sister who had started it all. She knew from an early age that she had been adopted from a large family. But beyond that, she didn't know much about her biological roots. Micah had always been curious, but says her mother cautioned her about delving too deeply into the past.
She often said to me, Micah, I wouldn't go down that road if I were you. And I would say, Mom, but why? She said, well, maybe you won't want to know certain things. You might not like what you find. And that was her biggest fear, that maybe if I did go there, I might not like what I found.
In fact, it was only when Micah was in her 30s that she discovered that Richard, her adopted younger brother, was actually her blood brother. But she never probed further. Then, 2 years ago, in December 1998, all that changed. Richard had a cancer scare, and suddenly finding out more about their biological family, learning details of their birth parents' medical history, became a necessity.
And I said, look, Rich, I'll do something. I'll call the state, and I'll find out from our records what our biological parents died of, or if they're still alive.
Though Richard's medical crisis would pass, Micah contacted the state of Connecticut, and soon a caseworker called. The same caseworker who would eventually call Gary Klar and Steve Barbin. She didn't have much medical information to share, but told Micah her family history was fascinating.
And I said, well, why is it so fascinating? And she said, because you are one of many children.
The caseworker told Micah that her birth parents had died, but gave her a list of her biological brothers and sisters. At that point, first names only to protect their privacy. With that new information, Micah set out to do some amateur detective work, starting with one name on that list, Gary.
So I started going through the phone book, and I came across some Garys, and I said, maybe this is my brother.
Just Gary's?
Just Gary. Yes, Gary who lives on this street, Gary who lives on that street. I mean, really, what a silly thing to do.
Not surprisingly, she came up empty-handed. But within days, the caseworker put Micah in touch with two other brothers on the list. They had been raised by the birth parents and were eager to meet their long-lost sister.
They actually came out and greeted me with beautiful flowers. They couldn't wait. They were peeking out the door when my car drove up. And they ran up to me, each one of the brothers, and they gave me the biggest hug and the biggest kiss. It was just like almost a common bond that you felt.
Micah says the brothers told her they always knew there'd been other babies, but were never sure where they had all gone. They did, however, remember something their father once said. And when they told Micah, it took her breath away.
The way it was worded was, Pop said there were 13 of you, and then he said a baby went to a Klar family. And I went, oh! And I went in the bathroom and I closed the door, and actually I cried. I said, oh my God, I dated my brother.
The brother, of course, was Gary Klar.
What were you feeling?
I was, to say the least, I was shocked, Stone, but also I felt a little bit like, oh my God, did I do something wrong here? Was I guilty of something? I mean, this is not something I wanted to think that I would date a brother, a blood brother.
How had it happened? It began with a chance meeting in 1979 at this Connecticut hospital. Gary was there with his father, who was in a coma after that accident. Micah worked at the hospital and was also visiting a dying relative. She ran into Gary in the intensive care unit and recognized him from his high school football days.
Wow, I said, are you Gary Klar? And he said, I'm Gary Klar. And he said, I know you.
We hooked up for whatever reason. The pain of, watching a relative die, whatever. The solace that maybe one finds in somebody. I wasn't married, and we kind of fell into each other's arms, so to speak.
Years before Gary met Micah, in fact, when Micah was just beginning to go out on dates here in Fairfield, she was already aware of the possibility that she might accidentally date one of her own brothers. That might sound far-fetched, except Micah had been told that her birth parents had a number of sons and that several had been given up for adoption. So she needed to choose her boyfriends very carefully.
You had a rather unusual first date question that you would ask the guys that were interested in taking you out.
Are you adopted? That was always my first question. I would say, are you sure you're not adopted?
Because you knew there were some
yeah,
some brothers out there.
There were some brothers out there in the area, yes.
Gary Klar had to pass that little test too. When he came calling, it was Micah's mom who popped the peculiar question.
She said, Gary, are you adopted? And he said, no, I'm not adopted. And she said, okay, she just, fine. And we continued to date.
And at that point, he had no idea.
He had no idea. And I had no idea.
And even if I had known I was adopted, I would never have known she was my sister anyway. So whatever great taboo that would be in this society we live in.
You couldn't have known.
There's no way.
Did you feel a connection with her?
Well, I think the connection I felt with her was one of empathy, of being in a hospital. I mean, was there a bond like there was between me and Stephen? No. It wasn't that deep. It wasn't that heavy.
You could have fallen in love.
Oh,
you could
sure.
have gotten married.
Absolutely.
You could have had children.
Yes. My wife's joke about that is we could have had squirrels for kids.
After dating for several months, Gary and Micah went their separate ways. Micah went on to get married, as did Gary. Now, almost 20 years later, they were about to become reacquainted in the most awkward and uncomfortable way imaginable.
When you finally talked about this,
right.
When you realized
we
what
were
had
incredulous.
happened.
We were incredulous. Well,
what
the
did you
first
say
thing
to
I said
each
to her
other?
is I called her up and I said, Micah. And she goes, hi, Gary, because she knew it was me. She was prepared for the call. I said, Micah, are you all right? And she said, absolutely. She was. She was fine. No problem. And I said, I am too. And indeed, she was very, very excited.
He said, we didn't know, Micah. And I said, no, we didn't, Gary, but I love you and you are my brother. I said, so welcome aboard.
Micah found great joy in it. And I think, you know, rightfully so. You know, it shouldn't be looked at as dirty or sordid or negative. What year was this?
If Gary and Micah have any lingering discomfort over what was and what might have been, it's not apparent. They'll tell you they're just happy to have found each other again, this time as brother and sister.
Micah was very intense with this story. I mean, she took it like a football and she ran to pay dirt.
If she hadn't done this.
Right, nobody would know. Micah knew she was adopted. And of course, the brother she was raised with, her brother Richard, also turns out to be my full-blood brother.
As if Gary hadn't already filled his lifetime quota of adoption surprises, Richard, the brother whose health problems had set off the chain of discoveries,
has been my workout partner for 15 years. So that's another...
Wait a minute. So you're working out with him?
Right.
This is your brother.
Yeah, but I didn't know he's my brother. And Richard is someone I've known probably closer to 20 years.
Another coincidence, another family connection.
Which was more stunning? That your best friend is your brother?
Yeah.
Or the girl you once dated is your sister?
Well, I think the most beautiful revelation to come out of all this is that my best friend, who is, we're so close and always have been close, is my real brother. Micah's story with me is a moment of another kind. I'm not quite sure if it's the story that I share with Stephen, because that is one of love and friendship and ultimately brotherhood. The story with Micah is one that, well, perhaps a cautionary tale about private adoptions.
So in one afternoon, Gary Klar had discovered that his best friend, a girl he once dated, and his weightlifting partner were all part of a family he never even knew existed, his own biological family.
It was an overwhelming amount of information to really process, and It's still going on, Stone. It doesn't end. The onion, there's still a few more layers of the onion that we have to peel back.
Gary Klar's journey of discovery still had a ways to go, with more people to meet and one more family secret yet to uncover.
Family Ties continues.
In the 2 years since Gary Klar found out about his adoption, he spent a lot of time prying for information, trying to make sense of his past. Sifting through this old steamer trunk with his son, Matt, he found some treasures: a Jewish prayer shawl, his father's diamond-tipped glass cutter, the tool of Ben Klar's trade.
Here's me. Look, Matt. Look at me here.
And among dozens of photographs, one familiar image he was seeing in a very different light. Gary as an infant in the arms of his great-aunt, Nita. Gary's great-aunt was a nurse at this Connecticut hospital where he was born. He's now learned that she helped facilitate his private adoption, putting the Klars in contact with the birth parents without the participation of a state agency. By the time Connecticut made private adoptions illegal in 1958, Gary's birth parents had given up 8 of their children, all through private channels.
They were resigned to their fate, having all these children. I don't know whether it was because they were Catholic and, an issue with birth control. I even took it down another road. Was this a business? Could you maybe make money selling children to be adopted? I don't go in that direction. I tend to think it means they were having all these kids. They couldn't afford us.
In fact, on the issue of money, state records say that Gary's biological parents received payment only for birth-related expenses.
My parents who gave birth to me perhaps found better homes for us than they could have given us, which I think is a nice thing, not a bad thing. I had a good home.
But Gary still couldn't understand why his parents had kept his adoption a secret. Even the father he was so close to all his life had never whispered a word. How had the truth of his birth been concealed for so long? Once more, the caseworker had the answer.
My mom, who raised me, Marge, faked her pregnancy.
She faked carrying you?
Yeah, she wore padded dresses for the 9-month period that she would have carried had she really been carrying a child. So she actually would pad the dress month after month.
It was not unheard of years ago for a woman to pretend to be pregnant before coming home with an adopted baby. Adoption often carried a stigma for couples unable to have children or children given up by their birth parents. But if the secret was meant to protect Gary growing up, he was having a hard time appreciating that fact now.
When you first heard it, were you angry at your mother?
Yes, I was.
At your adopted mother?
Yeah, I was. I have seen certain things in writing that state that she was absolutely adamant that I would never, ever be told, nor should I know, where I came from.
Do you think she was trying to protect you by not telling you?
I don't know. It's a hard question to answer. I wonder if maybe she was protecting herself.
And she made sure your father,
my father,
Ben, never told you.
Ben went along with it. My belief is he did it for her, and he certainly treated me as if I was his own child.
Even though you weren't blood?
Even though, as I found out, I was not his blood.
Gary didn't have Ben to turn to for answers. Only his adoptive mother remained to make sense of his newly jumbled history. But after all the years of secrecy, what would she say about the adoption? After all those years, would she have anything to say at all? Gary waited 4 months before he finally felt ready to talk to her.
And I called her up and I said, Mom, I know the secret. She said, what secret? I said,